Find out what is happening at the library, from virtual programming to fun new services. Hear recommendations on books, movies, TV shows, and so much more. This is In the Stacks at Mustang Library.
Do you want to hear a ghost story? I don't know about you, but I'm always in the mood for something spooky to read this time of year. Today, I wanted to focus on some titles that live in our nonfiction section of the stacks. These include short story collections, poetry, and more. The first title is Tiny Nightmares, Very Short Tales of Horror. In this playful, spine-tingling collection, leading literary and horror writers spin unforgettably chilling tales in only a few pages. Tiny Nightmares brings to life broken-hearted vampires, Uber-taking serial killers, mind-reading witches, and monsters of all imaging. We suggest reading with the hall light on and the bedroom door open just a crack. Tiny Nightmares, Very Short Tales of Horror was published in 2020. These bite-sized stories are anywhere from 4 to 8 pages long. The next title is The Ghost Variations, 100 Stories by Kevin Brockmeyer, published in 2021. Ghost stories tap into our most primal emotions as they encourage us to confront the timeless question, what comes after death? Here in tales that are by turns scary, funny, philosophic, and touching, you'll find that question sharpened, split, reconsidered, and met with a multitude of answers. A spirit who is fated to spend eternity reliving the exact moment she lost her chance at love. Ghostly trees that haunt the occupant of a wooden house. Specters that snatch anyone who steps into the shadows. And parakeets that serve as mouthpieces for the dead. These are just a few of the characters in this extraordinary compendium of 100 ghost stories. The Ghost Variations discovers new ways of looking at who we are and what matters to us, exploring how mysterious, sad, strange, and comical it is to be alive, or, as it happens, not to be. The next title I want to talk about is called Ghostly, a collection of ghost stories. Ghostly reveals the evolution of the ghost story genre, with tales going back to the 18th century and into the modern era, ranging across styles from gothic horror to Victorian, perfect for the classic and contemporary ghost story aficionado. This collection of ghost stories includes stories by Edith Wharton, Edgar Allan Poe, Neil Gaiman, Ray Bradbury, and many more. One of my favorite stories is titled The Specialist's Hat by Kelly Link, and it begins, "When you're dead," Samantha says, "you don't have to brush your teeth." "When you're dead," Claire says, "you live in a box and it's always dark, but you're not ever afraid." Claire and Samantha are identical twins. Their combined age is 20 years, 4 months, and 6 days. Claire is better at being dead than Samantha. Are you scared yet? Have you heard too many ghost stories? Well, how about instead we learn about the historical events surrounding these monstrous creatures? Lore is a podcast created by Aaron Mankey in 2015. It is a podcast about nonfiction scary stories that unveil the dark side of human nature. The World of Lore, Monstrous Creatures was published in 2017 and includes some of the best stories from the podcast. They live in shadows, deep in the forest, late in the night, in the dark recesses of our mind. They're spoken of in stories and superstitions, relics of an unenlightened age, old wives' tales passed down through generations. And yet, no matter how weary or jaded we have become, as individuals or as a society, a part of us remains vulnerable to them. Werewolves and wendigos, poltergeists and vampires, angry elves and vengeful spirits. In this beautifully illustrated volume, the host of the hit podcast Lore serves as a guide on a fascinating journey through the history of those terrifying creatures and explores not only the legends, but what they tell us about ourselves. Another book that I want to talk about is actually a collection of poetry titled Poems Bewitched and Haunted, selected and edited by John Hollander. A delightfully ghoulish array of specters and sorceresses, witches and ghosts, hags and apparitions haunt these pages. a literary parade of phantoms and shades to add to the revelry of All Hallows' Eve. Poems Bewitched and Haunted draws on 3,000 years of poetic forays into the supernatural. Ovid conjures the witch Medea, and Emily Dickinson records two souls conversing in a crypt, and poems that call out to be read aloud, whether around the campfire or the Ouija board. The last title I want to talk about is called Monster She Wrote: The Women Who Pioneered Horror and Speculative Fiction by Lisa Kroger and Melanie Anderson. Meet the women writers who defied convention to craft some of literature's strangest tales, from Frankenstein to The Haunting of Hill House and beyond. Frankenstein was just the beginning. Horror stories and other weird fiction wouldn't exist without the women who created it. From gothic ghost stories to psychological horror to science fiction, women have been primary architects of speculative literature of all sorts, and their own life stories are as intriguing as their fiction. Curated reading lists point you to their most spine-chilling tales. Part biography, part reader's guide, the engaging write-ups and detailed reading lists will introduce you to more than 100 authors and over 200 of their mysterious and spooky novels, novellas, and stories. I hope you enjoyed this journey of looking at some nonfiction titles that are perfect reads for the Halloween season. If any of these titles have intrigued you, they are available through the Scottsdale Public Library, and you can request these titles at scottsdalelibrary.org. Happy reading and happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween, everyone, and welcome to In the Stacks. Today we're going to be looking at scary movies as picked by us here at Mustang Library. First up is psychological thrillers. One movie that continually popped up was What Lies Beneath, a big fan favorite, starring Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer. Is she indeed losing her mind, or is her house really haunted? And is her husband, Harrison Ford, really a villain, or is he? Next up is Rebecca. This version, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, it has seen many remakes over the years, most notably by BBC, and the latest on Netflix, starring Emma Thompson and Armie Hammer. Psycho, another Alfred Hitchcock film. Who could forget this movie? And this guy. If this guy doesn't say creepy Anthony Perkins, then I don't know who does. And its iconic shower scene. Next up, we have old movies, starting with House of Wax, which was released in 1953 and is included in the Horror Hall of Fame. It starred Vincent Price, who was kind of another creepy dude. Ghost Story, although not as old as the other pictures, this was released in 1981 and starred Fred Astaire and John Houseman. And finally, we have Night of the Living Dead, released in 1968, and was probably the inspiration for The Walking Dead. Scary movies have scary creatures. Jaws, released in 1975, made us scared to go back into the water. If this doesn't scream, we're going to need a bigger boat, and I don't know what does. Alien, the original, because in space, no one can hear you scream, except the cat. The Thing, released in 1982 and directed by John Carpenter and starred Kurt Russell, gave a whole new meaning to the version of Alien. And finally, Signs by M. Night Shyamalan. I can honestly say I still cover my eyes during certain scenes when the alien comes into view. The horror genre would not be horror without mentioning Stephen King. The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, and released in 1980, brought a whole new meaning to isolation and snowstorm. If you see these two girls staying at your hotel, well, you may want to pedal the other way. Misery, starring James Caan and Kathy Bates, and directed by Rob Reiner, Meathead himself, brought a whole new meaning to the words, "I'm your #1 fan." Stephen King's It totally gave clowns a bad name. I don't think I need to say any more when you see this picture. Over the years, the scary and horror movie genre has become wildly popular, with more and more films being released each year. Crimson Peak had the entire iconic haunted house built from scratch just for the movie. The Haunting of Hill House, only on Netflix, has become wildly popular, as in The Lighthouse, Us, A Quiet Place, and Midsummer. In the scary movie genre, some people and movies are just evil. Hereditary, starring Toni Collette. This was released in 2018, and she swore she would never do another scary movie until she read this script. The Exorcist, released in 1973 and starring Linda Blair, brought a whole new meaning to the word possessed. Kids' movies are also not immune to being scary. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This version released in 1971 and starring Gene Wilder. I'm sorry, but these guys are just really creepy. The Wizard of Oz, which is also a family favorite, released in 1939. The Flying Monkeys, I gotta say, just really freaked me out. The Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, and Corpse Bride, all kids' movies, can be a little sensitive for younger viewers. And finally, scary movies would not be complete unless we included the iconic Halloween. The original version, released in 1978, directed by John Carpenter and starring Jamie Lee Curtis. This franchise has seen many, many sequels, the most recent coming out this month. So look for some of these films at Scottsdale Public Library or through our app service, Canopy, for streaming movies and entertainment. And we'll see you next time on another edition of In the Stacks.